Okay, so now we will go on to Irene Lawrence, Lauren Leggieri, and Margot Heffernan, who are going to talk about their protest at the American Academy of Pediatrics. Irene Lawrence is the Peaceful Defiance Coordinator for WDI USA, as well as Secretary on the board. She joined the board of WDI USA in September 2023. Lauren Leggieri is a gay rights activist working to stop pediatric gender transitions in the US. Lauren is a strategy director with the LGBT Courage Coalition. She focuses on organizing volunteers and direct actions. The LGBT Courage Coalition is an American-based registered nonprofit that seeks to impact culture and medicine to accept and support gender nonconformity in a non-medicalized way. Lauren has been interviewed on and led podcasts discussing medical transitions and the harms to the lesbian and gay communities. She has directed actions at the 2024 Endocrine Society Conference in Boston, Massachusetts, the American Academy of Pediatrics Annual Leadership Meeting in Chicago, Illinois, and the 2024 American Academy of Pediatrics Conference in Orlando, Florida. She will be leading an action at the US Supreme Court for the case of United States versus Skrmetti. Oral arguments will be heard in December 2024. Margot Heffernan is the board vice president at Women's Liberation Front. She's a writer and activist in the interest of women and girls, and she's got master's degrees in various topics. I just want to say quickly, I was very happy to be with both Lauren and Margot in Washington, D.C. on November 1st in support of German women and girls all over the world. So with that, I will turn it over to Irene, Lauren, and Margot.
It was very gratifying to be there in Orlando for the AAP conference. It's great to feel like we're spreading the word, because so much of the problem with gender affirming care is that people have really no idea that this is actually happening to children, to girls and boys. And so it was a great opportunity to be seen and heard. And so that's kind of how I would begin. And
it was great to be able to get this broad coalition of organizations together. I've said before, like the medical establishment is not really giving us any other opportunity to voice dissent. So direct action is really our only choice, right? Like, we don't want to have to be out there protesting, but even within the American Academy of Pediatrics, they have silenced any kind of questioning of this. They've rewritten the rules on how you can write resolutions and how other pediatricians can see resolutions. We had another cohort with us that actually managed to get like vendor status in the convention center while it was going on. They were a group of detransitioners led by Aaron Friday and January Littlejohn. And some of their feedback from being in there is that these pediatricians largely are completely unaware of the CAS review. They are unaware that there are any objections to this, and they are grossly misinformed about what actually happens within these gender clinics. A lot of these pediatricians do not become pediatricians because they want to harm children. They want to help children. And so when these pediatricians are getting kids coming in saying, I have gender dysphoria, or I feel this way or that way, they're sending them to the gender clinics believing that these children are going to get psychologically comprehensive psychological evaluations and therapy, and that's just not the case. But these pediatricians don't even know it. And while we were there, the American Academy of Pediatrics sent out emails. There were signs all over the convention saying, do not engage with protesters. They did not want them to even speak to us. They are silencing any dissent from within, top down. So we felt we had no other option but to be out there on the streets.
And again, it is the AAP is such a top-down organization. They control, the upper echelon of that organization controls everything about gender affirming care, from the speech to the actions and to the treatments. Many of the, just the regular members really don't know anything about much of anything about the CAS review or about what we call gender affirming care. It's really true that there's a lot of ignorance even amongst the body of the Pediatric Association, and so that awareness needs. I think that helped make even the pediatricians aware of what was
Yeah, well,
happening.
they definitely were shaken up by our presence,
Mhm.
and definitely my interruption of Admiral Levine's keynote speech. So when we went to Chicago in July, it was at the AAP Leadership Convention, their annual meeting where they vote on resolutions, etc. We brought signs saying you should vote for a resolution that, if anybody's familiar with the pediatrician Julia Mason, she has written a number of resolutions to the AAP saying, like, we need to look at this, we need to look at the evidence. Shortly after we left Chicago for their annual leadership meeting, they announced Admiral Levine as their keynote speech. And we were just like, absolutely not. We're going to make our presence known. These people need to know that people object to this. They need to know that children are being harmed. And somebody in the chat was asking, like, who do you think is motivating these people? At this point, I really believe that the AAP right now is in a position where, like, they're afraid to be sued. Because what happens if they say, oops? Like, how do you explain that you've sterilized a generation of children over an ideology? There's no backing out of that, right? So right now, I think they're just circling the wagons. They know that it's coming. And I do believe the AAP is the weakest link. Because like I said, pediatricians, once they are informed about this, are appalled. They are absolutely appalled.
We know how this harms children greatly. It's a horrible, horrible, horrible medical scandal. And in speaking with a young woman detransitioner last week, she mentioned, and this is also very true, I think, that although gender affirming care, I put that in quotes, of course, I don't know if you can see me putting it in quotes, but although gender affirming care is targeted toward all children, it disproportionately impacts young girls and young women.
It's an 80-20 it's about an 80-20 split.
Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I'm not, in no way am I diminishing the harm it does to young boys. It's a horrible thing. But to girls especially, the treatment alone is probably even more negatively impactful than it is the other way around. It's a life-altering and horrifying experience that we need to really we need to get that out there. We need to get that out there in our communities, locally, in any way we can. Because once people understand what's happening, they start to understand a little bit more. In small increments, they start to understand. Very few people realize that in most communities, there are these clinics, gender affirming care clinics that
they're prolific.
Kids. Yeah, and people just don't realize that yet. I hope that they're starting to.
People really do not understand what gender affirming care is.
Mm-hmm.
Most people will tell you that that's not happening to kids. And I'm like, oh yes, it is. There are children, there are 12 and 13-year-olds having their breasts removed, having their puberty blocked, giving cross-sex hormones. This is happening. And if you can get over that, like, denial that this is actually happening, people are like horrified. In mass, people are horrified. And largely, a lot of these kids are same-sex attracted because it is a common gay experience to believe that you are the opposite sex, because that it's so insidious, because that is exactly what I thought as a child, because it is a very childlike way to explain why you're different. You know, like when we say stop transing gay kids, a little people are like, oh, well, kids aren't gay. What we mean is proto-gay kids, right? Like, I do not believe children have a sexuality, but that is part of the confusion, right? Like, we all know most gender non-conforming kids grow up to be gay, but when you are gender nonconforming as a child, you do not understand what that is because you are not sexual. It is precisely because you are not sexual that you don't understand your difference.
But sometimes it's the parents too, who understand very well that their kid is
Right.
going to grow up to be gay, and they're the ones pressuring this because they see what's coming and they would rather have a trans kid, so to speak, than a gay kid.
So there's two elements to this, right? There's I'm going to pigeonhole people a little bit. There's the liberal side, liberal parents who are like, oh, we're celebrating this whole new category of people, this magical trans child. And then there is a conservative, maybe religious element that are like, I just don't want a gay kid. And I think the root of that is we've come very far in gay rights, but we never really rooted out the discomfort with the gender nonconforming homosexual, right? Like you can have a feminine presenting lesbian, you can have a masculine presenting gay man, and people don't actually have to think about what you're doing in the bedroom. But if I show up or a flamboyant gay man shows up, that's exactly what people immediately think is like, definitely a gay, definitely a lesbian. And I think we've never really rooted that out. We've never really worked that out within the gay community as well, because I do think a lot of this is internalized homophobia.
Totally.
So we got this big group together, and it was a broad coalition of people, but we all agree on one thing. Any transition of children is a human rights abuse, and we need to get the message out there. And it was just a great group of people. We set up like right in front of the building. You couldn't miss us. And then by a stroke of luck, we figured out a way to get somebody into the convention while Admiral Levine gave his speech. And I was like, you know what? I'll do it. I will absolutely do it, because we need to force some cognitive dissonance here. And if you have a masculine presenting lesbian show up and say, you're transing gay kids, like, I'm hoping that clicks some buttons in people's heads, because that is historically the best way I've been able to get through to people, is that you're looking at me and I'm saying, who do you think masculine little girls grow up to be? Who do you think feminine little boys grow up to be? And people, they get it. They get it. So they ended up getting me in there, and I knew I had very, very little time. Once I started yelling, I knew that it was going to be seconds before they came and dragged me out of there.
As we all know as pediatricians, adolescence is a critical period of development, both physically and emotionally.
Why did you pressure WPATH to remove age restrictions then? How does that help children? Most gender nonconforming kids grow up to be gay. Stop transing gay kids. You are all complicit in homosexual conversion. Stop transing gay kids. You are all complicit in homosexual conversion. Stop transing gay kids.
So yeah, I was sitting there for a good hour and a half before Levine went on and thinking, how do I make the most impact? And everyone in that auditorium heard me. This place is set up for acoustics. Everyone heard me. Levine looked right at me. He tried to continue talking, but there was no ignoring me. And like I said, it was a matter of seconds before they drug me out of there. And I just swaggered out of there with a grin on my face, knowing that everyone in there heard me, and they are going to have to think about it. They are going to have to talk about it. We're out there with our signs, and there is no ignoring it anymore. There is going to be a conversation, whether the AAP likes it or not, within those groups of pediatricians. What happened? They're going to have conversations at dinner that night, and they're going to say, what happened? Who was that person? And they're going to have to talk about it. So these are the things that we have to do. They've given us no other choice. This is all a top-down push, and we have to start disrupting. Peacefully, but we need to start disrupting.
My hope is that that clip can be shared as widely as possible. I know that it's been picked up in multiple places, but I think that was a very powerful message and a wake-up call to so many people, and I hope I just hope it can be disseminated as widely as possible. And then it should be everywhere if we can make that happen. Because it's very true about same-sex attracted kids. They are being, of course, many troubled children are being targeted, but same-sex attracted kids, very much so.
And we talk all the time at WDI about the importance of like withdrawing our consent, that like these ideologies, these institutions, they only have power because we consent to them. And they need to hear from more of us. And they need to see that we can withdraw our consent and we can remove our support. And then if enough people do that, then it can crumble.
I would just like to speak to, there's a lot of comments in the chat about the presidential election and Trump coming out against pediatric gender transition. I think we need to have a very realistic idea of what he actually can do. Like as an executive, he has a lot of leverage and freedom in foreign affairs, but there are checks and balances in the United States for a reason. And I do not believe with the recent overturning of Roe v. Wade, their argument was that states have the right to legislate medical practices. So I do not believe that Trump will be able to enact a federal ban. We need to go state by state. We need to get active in our community. We need to get active on our school boards, in our local legislation. We need to be out there and start pushing this locally because it is going to be a state by state thing.
Here in Virginia, we have something called the Virginia Values Act, which allows, men to declare their legal womanhood and vice versa. And so there's a perfect example right here of a state-bound act that is just here in Virginia, but this is happening in many other states. And though that's not specifically about gender affirming care, it rolls into this whole larger issue of, men becoming women and all of this nonsense. So that's something we need to pay attention to in our own locales. We really need to amp that up. This is not going to be a cure-all. I mean, no matter what, we have to do something in our own states.
And not just legislatively either. Like there needs to be a cultural shift and an understanding of what is actually happening. I think the easiest way in is talking about children, but there needs to be a conversation about the harm being done to vulnerable adults as well.
Absolutely.
Because someone who comes into a clinic or into a psychiatrist's office, even if they're an adult, they're being told, you have gender dysphoria, this is the only option. These are vulnerable people. Clearly, if you're struggling with knowing and understanding and accepting what sex you are vulnerable and you are probably mentally ill.
Absolutely.
We have to decouple this from the abortion conversation too, because they've been so successfully force-teamed and they're completely different.
Right, because they make this analogy of like bodily autonomy. Well, my argument is that yes, human beings do have bodily autonomy. However, no human being is performing a sex change operation on themselves. No human being is prescribing testosterone or estrogen to themselves. Doctors are complicit in this, and doctors do not have the right to harm people. It's do no harm, and this is harmful. The hormones, like the whole establishment of endocrinology was developed to put the body back into homeostasis. If you are giving a body wrong sex hormones, you are deliberately taking a body out of homeostasis and creating a disease state in the body. If you are removing healthy sexual organs, you are creating a disease state in the body. This is not medicine, and we need a cultural shift and real talk around these issues. You always have that friend you might have an opening with, right? And it's those small conversations that make a difference.
Asking questions can be so effective too. Like, why is it that this is the only area where in order to be authentic, you have to change everything about yourself? Like just trying to, like you said, creating that cognitive dissonance and getting people to think.
Another thing is these physicians who treat, I'll put that in quotes again, treat what we've been, forced to believe is this business of gender dysphoria. they know full well that putting testosterone in a woman's body is toxic, and that vice versa as well. Endocrinologists know that.
I was talking to a woman who just started hormone replacement for menopause, and the doctor was very, very explicit with her that like we need to really monitor this because it's basically poison.
Exactly.
So they know this. They know it. They know it. I talked to a young detransition man. This is a 20-year-old boy who was castrated, who would have otherwise just grown up to be gay. And when he went back to the clinic, because no one else will touch these kids, the medical establishment is not even set up to help detransitioners. There's no medical billing, no medical codes for it. So when he went back to the only hospital, Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, who would help him, what they told him, what they looked him in the eye and said, because he wanted testosterone, he can't produce his own, and he doesn't want to be on estrogen. They looked him in the eye and said, we only prescribe testosterone to females. So they know exactly what they're doing, and they are just beholden to this ideology. We're doing another action in front of the Supreme Court on December 4th. We encourage anyone who can get to DC on that day to show up. Like, this case is going to be monumental, and although we do believe we're going to win, we do believe that the Supreme Court is going to vote in our favor and say Tennessee does have the right to ban this treatment. That still leaves half of the country's children being harmed by this. So we need to shake them up. We need to show some cognitive dissonance. It can't just be people with signs that say, you know, Jesus will save, and the Rainbow Coalition on the other side. We want to have a coalition of especially gays and lesbians on our side. So we have another broad coalition of organizations showing up. Wolf and WDI are also going to join us. Partners for Ethical Care, Gender Health Query. But anyone who can show up, please show up. You'll know us. You'll see us, because we're gonna have a presence there. And it's important because we need the country to see that this is a media opportunity here, right? Like, we need the country to see there are two sides to this, and it's not just bigots on one side and gays on the other. So we have an opportunity to speak to the nation on December 4th, and I encourage anyone who can get there, please join us.
We can't understate the importance of United States versus Skrmetti, but we also have to understand its limitations, because as Lauren said, even if the court rules in support of Tennessee, which most of us think it will, that will mean that states may legally and constitutionally ban puberty blockers and opposite sex hormones for minors, but it won't mean that they must do so. So as Lauren said, kids in roughly half the states will still be subjected to this, even if we win Skrmetti, which most of us think we will. All right, thanks so much to the three of you.